They called her prey. 3 minutes later their strongest warrior couldn't walk. You know what's funny about humans? We Zephyrians thought we had them all figured out. Soft, squishy, pathetic little creatures who somehow managed to crawl their way off their dirt ball of a planet and into our prestigious Galactic Military Academy. Ha! The irony still makes my scales itch. I'm Nexeler, by the way. 3rd-year cadet. 4 arms, razor-sharp claws, and about as arrogant as they come. Well, was arrogant. Past tense. You'll understand why in a moment. The day Maya Chen walked into our combat training facility, the entire hall went quiet. Not the good kind of quiet, mind you. The kind that happens when someone brings a pet to a gladiator match. She was unremarkable. Average height for a human, which meant she barely reached my chest plates. Brown hair tied back in what humans call a ponytail. Dark eyes that seemed to take in everything without giving anything away. No claws. No natural armor. No visible weapons. Just soft pink skin and a uniform that looked 2 sizes too big. Seriously. That was Kronthul speaking. Son of Warlord Vextar. Heir to the Crimson Fleet. And someone who'd never met a challenge he couldn't crush with his bare hands. All 6 of them. They're letting prey animals into the academy now. The laughter that followed was predictable. Harsh, grating sounds from a dozen different species. Each one convinced they were witnessing the galaxy's worst joke. Kronthul stood nearly 3 meters tall, his Zephyrian build making him look like a living siege engine. Bone ridges ran along his skull. His skin was the color of dried blood, and when he flexed you could hear his joints creak like ship hull under pressure. Maya just stood there, taking notes. Actual notes, on some primitive human tablet, while being mocked by the most dangerous beings in the sector. Look at her, wheezed Torvik, a Sakaran, whose crystalline body structure made him nearly indestructible. She's studying us like we're some kind of academic exercise. Maybe she's writing her will, suggested Kulnara, her serpentine form coiling with amusement. Humans do that before they die. Right. More laughter. More pointing. More casual dismissal of what they assumed was just another failed experiment in interspecies cooperation. But here's the thing about Maya Chen. While everyone else was busy being entertained by their own superiority, she was working. Those notes weren't random scribbles. She was cataloging weaknesses, measuring reaction times, analyzing movement patterns. Every joke, every flex, every casual display of natural weaponry was being recorded and processed. "Excuse me," Maya said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade through silk. "Is this the advanced combat training class?" The question was so perfectly innocent, so completely naive, that the laughter died in our throats. Kronthul's eyes narrowed to slits. "Advanced combat," he repeated slowly, like he was explaining something to a particularly dim child. "Yes, little human. This is where real warriors learn to kill things that fight back." Maya nodded thoughtfully, and made another note. "Good. I was worried I'd gotten lost again." Lost. Again. As if she'd been wandering around the academy like some tourist who'd taken a wrong turn at the gift shop. I should have known right then. Should have recognized the signs. But no, I was too busy being impressed with my own species' obvious superiority to notice that Maya Chen wasn't afraid, wasn't nervous, wasn't showing any of the normal reactions you'd expect from someone who'd just walked into a room full of apex predators. She was planning. Let me paint you a picture of how things worked at the Galactic Military Academy. It wasn't pretty, but it was effective. The Zephyrian Empire had built its reputation on one simple principle: the strong survive, the weak become footnotes. Our training reflected this philosophy with all the subtlety of a plasma cannon to the face. Commander Velkorix ran the combat division like his personal torture chamber. 8 feet of scarred Zephyrian muscle, missing his left eye from some classified operation, and possessing all the warmth of a neutron star. He'd been breaking cadets for 30 years, and he took pride in his work. Combat training, he'd announce every morning, his voice carrying across the facility like grinding metal, is not about learning to fight, it's about learning to kill. Efficiently, brutally, without hesitation. The Academy's pecking order was established through these daily exercises. At the top sat beings like Kronthul. Zephyrians were natural-born killers, with reflexes that could track a hummingbird's wing beat and strength that could crush titanium. Their bone density was 3 times that of most species. Their muscle fibers were designed for explosive power, and their nervous systems processed information at speeds that made most other races look like they were moving through syrup. Then came the Sakurans, living crystals who could shatter bone with casual backhand slaps. Their bodies were essentially walking fortresses, immune to most forms of physical damage and capable of generating enough force to punch through ship armor. The Vorthak occupied the next tier, amphibious predators with acid-producing glands and regenerative abilities that bordered on the obscene. Lose a limb, give it a few hours. Severe burns, Tuesday morning inconvenience. Even the weaker species in our class were apex predators from their respective worlds. Kulnara's people, the Sitheri, were living weapons, flexible enough to tie themselves in knots, strong enough to crush a human skull with their bare coils, and venomous enough to drop a charging Taurian with a single bite. And then, there were humans. Velkorix made his position clear during Maya's first evaluation. She'd been assigned to demonstrate basic combat readiness against a training dummy. Standard procedure. The dummy was designed to simulate a Terran grizzly bear, which our xenobiology texts assured us was one of Earth's more dangerous predators. Maya approached the exercise with that same methodical patience she'd shown in the main hall. She spent nearly 10 minutes examining the dummy, testing its joints, measuring its reach, even checking the wear patterns on its synthetic claws. Any day now, Cadet Chen, Velkorix growled, his patience wearing thin. Maya nodded and engaged the dummy. What followed was adequate. She demonstrated basic defensive techniques, managed to avoid the worst of the simulated attacks, and eventually disabled the target through what appeared to be sheer persistence. No style, no flair, just grinding determination. Pathetic, Velkorix announced to the assembled class. Humans are scavengers pretending to be warriors. They survived on their world through luck and stubbornness, not skill. Kronthol's laughter boomed across the training floor. Did you see that? She couldn't even properly engage a training dummy. What happens when she faces a real opponent? That question would be answered sooner than any of us expected, because Kronthol had made one crucial error in his assessment. He'd mistaken careful observation for weakness, tactical thinking for hesitation. Maya Chen wasn't struggling with the dummy, she was learning from it. The challenge came 3 days later, during what should have been a routine sparring session. Velkorix had paired us off according to his twisted sense of humor. Kronthol was supposed to face Torvik, a match that would have been entertaining in the way that watching 2 asteroids collide is entertaining, destructive, spectacular, and ultimately pointless. But Kronthol had other ideas. Commander, he called out, his voice carrying that particular tone of arrogance that only comes from never having faced real consequences. I request a different opponent. Velkorix paused in his inspection of combat gear, one scarred eyebrow rising toward his missing eye. Oh, and who did you have in mind, Cadet? Kronthol's grin was all teeth and malice. The human. The training hall went dead silent, not the comfortable quiet of focused attention, but the electric stillness that precedes a lightning strike. Even the environmental systems seemed to hold their breath. Interesting, Velkorix mused, his remaining eye gleaming with predatory interest. And why would the son of Warlord Vexstar want to waste time with prey? Education, sir. Kronthol's response was smooth as poisoned silk. If humans are going to serve alongside real warriors, they need to understand their place in the hierarchy. Better they learn it here than in actual combat. Maya looked up from her equipment check, those dark eyes unreadable. I accept. The simplicity of her response sent a ripple of excitement through the assembled cadets. No protests, no attempts to negotiate, no visible fear, just 2 words that sealed what everyone assumed would be her humiliation. Excellent. Velkorix clapped his hands together with the enthusiasm of someone about to witness a particularly brutal execution. Full contact sparring. Standard Academy rules. First blood, submission or unconsciousness determines the winner. The betting started immediately. Krolnara was taking odds on how long Maya would last. Torvik wagered she'd be unconscious within 30 seconds. A klaxon named Hexlar put his money on 15. I should mention that Kronthol had never lost a sparring match, ever. His record stood at 47 wins, 0 losses, with most matches ending in under 2 minutes. He'd hospitalized 6 opponents, sent 12 to the medical bay, and forced the remainder to submit before suffering serious injury. His fighting style was brutal efficiency personified, overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. He'd studied every major combat discipline in the galaxy, mastered weapons from a dozen worlds, and possessed the kind of natural athleticism that made professional soldiers weep with envy. Maya, on the other hand, had demonstrated competence, adequate performance, the ability to avoid getting killed by training equipment. "Any last words, little human?" Kronthul asked as they took their positions in the sparring circle. He'd stripped to his combat vest, revealing muscle groups that most species didn't even possess. His natural armor plating gleamed under the harsh training lights. Maya finished adjusting her standard-issue protective gear, and looked up at him with that same thoughtful expression she'd worn when cataloging weaknesses 3 days earlier. "Just one question." "Oh." Kronthul's amusement was evident. "What's that?" "Do Zephyrians heal as fast as Vorthak?" The question was so unexpected, so completely out of context, that several cadets actually laughed. Even Velkorix cracked a smile. Here was this tiny human, facing down 3 meters of living destruction, and she was asking about comparative regeneration rates. Kronthul's grin widened. "Why, planning to hurt me?" Maya's response was delivered with the kind of matter-of-fact tone usually reserved for discussing weather patterns or lunch menus. "Yes." The opening bell rang, and Kronthul exploded into motion like a missile launched from a destroyer's tubes. 6 arms moving in perfect coordination, each one capable of delivering bone-crushing force, all focused on ending this fight before it could become embarrassing. Maya stepped backward. Not a desperate scramble, not a panicked retreat. A single measured step that carried her exactly far enough to avoid Kronthul's opening combination. His massive fist swept through empty air where her head had been a fraction of a second earlier. "Ha!" Torvik's crystalline laughter rang out across the training hall. "She's running already." More laughter from the assembled crowd. Jeers, catcalls, and the kind of commentary you'd expect from spectators watching a mouse try to box a tiger. Kronthul himself seemed more amused than concerned as he pressed his attack, his movements fluid and practiced. Maya continued her retreat, circling the sparring ring with careful steps. Each of Kronthul's strikes came close enough to ruffle her uniform, but never quite connected. She'd duck under a haymaker, sidestep across, or simply lean away from attacks that should have been impossible to see coming. "Stand still and fight," Kronthul growled, his amusement beginning to fade into irritation. "Or are all humans this cowardly? She's not even trying to hit back." Kulnara observed, her serpentine form coiled with anticipation. "This is pathetic." But Velkorix was watching more carefully. His single eye tracked Maya's movements with growing interest, noting details that the younger cadets missed. Her footwork was precise, economical. Her head movement wasn't random evasion but calculated positioning. And her breathing remained steady despite the pace Kronthul was setting. 30 seconds, announced Hexlar, checking his chronometer. "She's lasted longer than I expected." Kronthul's attacks became more aggressive, more desperate. He wasn't used to opponents who could avoid his strikes for this long. His reputation was built on overwhelming force applied quickly and decisively. Extended engagements were foreign territory. Maya's defensive strategy seemed to consist of making Kronthul miss by the smallest possible margins. She'd twist away from punches that grazed her skin, duck under combinations that displaced her hair, step out of range of kicks that brushed her clothing. It was like watching someone dance with a hurricane. "What's she doing?" muttered Nexalar, another Zephyrian cadet whose respect for Kronthul was absolute. "She's just surviving. Barely," added Vextul, his 4 eyes tracking the action with predatory intensity. "One mistake and she's finished." But Maya wasn't making mistakes. Every movement seemed calculated, every step planned. While Kronthul grew increasingly frustrated with his inability to land a solid hit, Maya remained calm, focused, almost clinical in her approach. The crowd's amusement began to shift into something else, confusion perhaps, or the first stirrings of doubt. This wasn't how these fights were supposed to go. Humans were supposed to fold quickly under pressure, not demonstrate the kind of defensive awareness that was making Kronthul look sloppy. 1 minute, Hexlar called out, his voice carrying a note of surprise. Kronthul's breathing had become labored. His attacks, while still powerful, were losing their precision. Sweat beaded on his bone ridges, and his movements showed the first signs of fatigue. Maya looked exactly the same as when the fight started. Impossible, whispered Torvik. She's not even winded. Velkorix leaned forward, his scarred features creased with concentration. Something was wrong with this picture. Humans weren't supposed to possess this kind of endurance, this level of tactical awareness. Their files indicated average reflexes, limited strength, minimal natural armor. Yet here was Maya Chen, making the Academy's most feared cadet look like he was fighting shadows. Stop playing games, Kronthul roared, launching himself forward in a desperate all-out assault. All 6 arms moved in a blur of striking surfaces, each one aimed at ending the fight permanently. Maya stepped into the attack. What happened next redefined everything I thought I knew about humans' combat, and the fundamental nature of predator versus prey relationships. Instead of retreating from Kronthul's desperate assault, Maya moved forward, not recklessly, not with the blind aggression we'd come to expect from cornered animals, but with the calculated precision of someone executing a plan that had been forming for the past 90 seconds. She slipped between his flailing arms like water flowing through a broken dam, her movements suddenly sharp and purposeful. The defensive posture she'd maintained throughout the opening phase vanished, replaced by an offensive capability that shouldn't have existed. Her first strike was a palm heel to Kronthul's solar plexus. The impact produced a sound like a sledgehammer hitting wet leather, and Kronthul's eyes went wide with shock. Not pain, mind you. Shock. No one had ever hit him hard enough to feel it through his natural armor plating. What the— Torvik's crystalline form had gone completely still, his usual commentary dying in his throat. Maya didn't pause to admire her work. Her second strike was a knife hand to Kronthul's throat, delivered with surgical precision to a nerve cluster that most Academy cadets didn't even know existed. Kronthul's roar of rage turned into a strangled gasp as his vocal cords spasmed. Impossible, breathed Kelinara, her serpentine coils tightening with involuntary tension. She's not strong enough to penetrate Zephyrian armor. But Maya wasn't trying to penetrate armor. She was targeting joints, pressure points, nerve clusters, and other vulnerable spots that most fighters ignored in favor of overwhelming force. Her strikes weren't about raw power, they were about precision, timing, and anatomical knowledge. Kronthul swung wildly with his upper arms, trying to catch this suddenly dangerous opponent. Maya ducked under the sweep and drove her elbow into the soft tissue behind his knee. The leg buckled, sending 3 meters of apex predator stumbling sideways. The crowd's laughter had died completely. What we were witnessing wasn't the clumsy flailing of a desperate prey animal. This was systematic dismantling by someone who understood exactly how to hurt people. She's been studying us, Velkorix said quietly, his voice carrying a note of recognition that made my scales crawl. All this time she's been learning how we move, how we fight, where we're vulnerable. Maya's next combination was a thing of beauty and terror. She feinted high, drawing Kronthul's guard up, then dropped low and swept his supporting leg. As he fought for balance, she rose with an uppercut to his exposed ribs that produced a crack audible across the training hall. Kronthul's bellow of pain was unlike anything I'd ever heard from him. This was the sound of someone experiencing genuine hurt for the first time in his life. His natural armor was designed to deflect conventional attacks, but Maya wasn't using conventional attacks. She was exploiting the gaps between plates, the flexible joints, the unprotected areas that existed in any biological system. How does she know where to hit? Hexlar whispered, his multiple eyes fixed on the impossible scene before us. Our anatomy isn't even classified information, but no one studies it in this kind of detail. Maya's response to this question came in the form of a spinning heel kick to Kronthul's temple. The impact sent him reeling, his coordination visibly deteriorating, as his inner ear struggled to process the trauma. Deathworlders, Velkorix said, the word carrying the weight of sudden terrible understanding. She's from a death world.
The term hit the assembled cadets like a cold wave. Deathworlders were theoretical constructs, beings evolved on planets so hostile that survival required capabilities beyond normal parameters. We'd heard rumors, whispered stories, but never actual confirmation. Maya pressed her advantage with ruthless efficiency. Every strike was calculated to cause maximum damage while conserving her energy. She'd turn Kronthul's own momentum against him, use his size as a liability, exploit his growing desperation, a knee to the liver, an elbow to the base of the skull, a ridge hand to the floating ribs, each impact precise, devastating, and perfectly timed. Kronthul, for his part, was beginning to understand that he was no longer the predator in this relationship. His attacks became wilder, more desperate, less controlled. He was fighting for survival now, not dominance. Maya seemed to sense this shift. Her movements became more aggressive, more direct. She was no longer content to simply avoid and counter. She was hunting. The next exchange would end everything. Kronthul threw a haymaker with his right upper arm, putting everything he had behind a punch that could have shattered reinforced concrete. Maya caught his wrist, stepped into his body, and executed a throw that sent him crashing to the training floor with enough force to crack the reinforced surface. Before he could recover, she was on him. Her knee found his throat, her hands found his extended arm, and with a movement that seemed almost casual, she applied leverage in a direction that Scifian joints were never designed to accommodate. The sound of Kronthul's arm breaking echoed through the training hall like a gunshot. The medical bay of the Galactic Military Academy had seen its share of training injuries over the years. Broken bones, torn muscles, occasional concussions from particularly enthusiastic sparring sessions. But nothing quite like what Maya Chen had done to Kronthul. Dr. Yelmorin, the Academy's chief medical officer, stood over the diagnostic table with an expression that mixed professional fascination with genuine horror. Her 6 arms moved in practiced coordination, manipulating holographic displays that showed the extent of Kronthul's injuries in excruciating detail. Compound fracture of the ulnar and radius, she announced to the assembled crowd of gawking cadets. Complete dislocation of the shoulder joint, severe trauma to the elbow's connective tissue. She paused, consulting her readings again, hairline fractures extending up into the humerus. Kronthul lay on the medical platform, conscious but heavily sedated. His usual arrogance had been replaced by something that looked uncomfortably like fear. His broken arm was encased in a regeneration field, the bones slowly knitting back together under the influence of advanced medical technology. "How long for full recovery?" asked Cadet Vextul, his 4 eyes fixed on the diagnostic readouts. 6 weeks, minimum, Dr. Yelmorin replied, assuming no complications. Scifian bone density works against us here. The heavier the structure, the longer it takes to properly heal. A commotion at the medical bay entrance announced the arrival of Warlord Vexter himself. 3 meters of scarred military authority, flanked by a personal guard that could have conquered small planets. His reputation preceded him like a shockwave, and even the medical staff stepped back respectfully as he approached his son's bedside. "Explain," he said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet menace that made seasoned warriors reconsider their life choices. Maya stood near the observation window, still wearing her training uniform, apparently unconcerned by the presence of one of the galaxy's most feared military leaders. She'd been writing in that same notebook, documenting the medical procedures with the same methodical attention she'd shown during combat analysis. "Your son challenged me to a sparring match," she said without looking up from her notes. "I accepted. He lost." The simplicity of her response sent a ripple of tension through the room. No one spoke to Warlord Vexter with such casual directness, certainly not humans. "Lost," Vexter repeated, his tone suggesting that the concept was foreign to him. "My son has never lost a combat engagement." "He has now," Maya replied, finally looking up from her notebook. "Would you like me to explain how?" Commander Velkarik stepped forward before Vexter could respond. His single eye was bright with a mixture of respect and fear that I'd never seen before. "Sir," he said carefully, "I believe we've been operating under some fundamental misconceptions about human capabilities." "Oh." Vexter's attention shifted to the combat instructor. And what misconceptions would those be? Velkorix gestured toward Maya with something approaching reverence. We assumed they were weak because they lacked natural armor, claws, or obvious weaponry. We evaluated them based on our own evolutionary advantages without considering theirs. Maya closed her notebook and approached the group with that same measured pace she'd used throughout the fight. Earth is what you might call a death world, she said conversationally. Everything there is trying to kill everything else all the time. We didn't evolve to be the strongest or fastest predators. We evolved to be the smartest. Intelligence doesn't break bones. Vexter observed coldly. No, Maya agreed. But it tells you exactly where and how to apply force for maximum effect. Your son is stronger than me, faster than me, and better armored than me. But I've spent 3 days studying how Zephyrians move, where your joints articulate, and what happens when stress is applied to your skeletal structure at specific angles. She gestured toward Kronthol's immobilized form. Zephyrian bones are incredibly dense, but that density becomes a liability when subjected to torsional stress. Your shoulder joints are designed for power, not flexibility. And your nervous system, while faster than human standard, processes pain signals in predictable patterns that can be exploited. The medical bay had gone completely silent. Even Dr. Yilmorin had stopped her ministrations to listen. Furthermore, Maya continued, humans are persistence hunters. We're designed to outlast our prey through superior endurance and tactical thinking. Your son tried to end the fight quickly, relying on overwhelming force. When that failed, he became increasingly desperate and sloppy. I simply had to wait for him to make a mistake. Warlord Vexter studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. And you could do this to any of us. Maya's response was delivered with the same matter-of-fact tone that had characterized her entire performance. Given sufficient preparation time and anatomical data, yes. The implications of this statement settled over the room like a heavy blanket. If humans could systematically analyze and exploit the weaknesses of any species, if they could turn superior strength and speed into liabilities through tactical thinking. Remarkable, Velkorix murmured. We've been training warriors. You're training soldiers. Maya smiled for the first time since I'd met her. There's a difference between fighting and winning, Commander. We learned that difference a long time ago. The Academy's policies regarding human cadets were revised the following day.